Um, Hello, everyone, and again to those who were here earlier, and welcome to today's WCEF side event being organized by the African Circular Economy Network. Today's session is in two parts. For the first part, I'm going to focus on sharing an overview of ACEN's participation in WCEF 2022 and 2023, the highlights, the insights, and outcomes. For the second part, we'll be working as a group to delve deeper into a concept that stuck out during WCEF 2023, material as a service in the African context. So this concept is being developed as a result of the joint effort of ACEN, Turntoo, Chatham House, and Het Groene Brein. I hope I got that pronunciation right. We are glad to have you all here, and we look forward to engaging and having an insightful session. My name is Deborah Winate, and I would please like to remind you that if you are yet to rename yourself, kindly name yourself with your name and your organization for easy identification. I'll give a minute for us to do that. Thank you. Thank you. If we could go to the next slide, please. Right. So before speaking about the overview, as we should be doing, I would like to reiterate that the ultimate vision of the African Circular Economy Network is to build a restorative African economy that generates well-being and prosperity for each people. There is also a focus on maintaining and regenerating the rich African environmental resources that we possess. So while doing this, we are also interested in bringing everyone to the table. So Africa is very diverse with 54 countries, and that is why inclusivity is a key aspect of what we do. It is exciting, therefore, to see that ACEN currently has representation in 42 countries with 500 members all over these countries to date. That is really exciting. We hope that our continuous engagement will deepen and widen the reach and impact on the continent. Next slide, please. Now, WCEF 2022 was very phenomenal in projecting the circular economy work in Africa. Since WCEF inception in 2017, last year was the first time it was hosted in an African country, that's Rwanda, and with stakeholders from Africa as co-hosts, including ACEN. So ACEN, as should be, was adequately represented and adequately participated in various aspects of the program. I would first speak about the side events. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Yes, the 5 side events that was based on the 5 big bets. If you're yet to read the reports by ACA on the 5 big bets, please, you're welcome to do so. It helps to give perspective on where to focus on when we talk about circular economy in Africa. Now, Now, this event, I would say, did so well by helping to build momentum for the WCEF 2022 in December. This fact is proven by the level of engagement and participation that was recorded. We can see from the slide here that there was an average of 100 participants across over 100 participants across the 5 events. Aside the lead participation from countries, African countries such as South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, we also had good participation from outside the continent, like the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and United States. So that is really good to see. And the interesting part of this data actually is how people have gone back to engage with the materials that were put out there. This shows how important this content are and how people really want to know more about the content that we have put out there. Next slide, please. Now, another big part of the WCEF 2022 was the 5 Africa studios that were hosted by the African Circular Economy Network. The high attendance shows that these sessions played an important role in reaching stakeholders in and around those areas where they were organized. The sessions also, it's obvious that they facilitated local conversations that were relevant to the context of participants. So the utmost part of this is that there were palpable outcomes from this session, and you can see these outcomes laid out here. We are going to go into that in the following slide. So if we can go on, please. Now, I have already mentioned earlier that ACEN was represented by key organizational members and played key roles in the overall rollout of the forum in 2022 in achieving the results. So it played the roles in different capacities: communication, in organizing events, in putting out what should be put out, and all of these various capacities. And ACEN's role supported in achieving the results that were recorded in 2022, bringing stakeholders together on the continent, some that didn't even know that the others existed, or the work of the other people that existed, also connecting the key players, facilitating local conversations, and also advancing circular economy in Africa, and many other opportunities that the circular economy brought about. Next slide, please. So I pointed out earlier that there were palpable outcomes from the WCEF 2022, which really helped in projecting circular economy on the continent of Africa, bringing new people into the conversation, and also connecting old people. And the top of it that we have here, you can see all of that I iterated. I don't have to go through that, but we, led by Chatham House, we were able to launch the Global Circular Economy Roadmap Initiative, which was facilitating policy exchange, knowledge sharing, and bringing inclusivity into the conversation around circular economy on the continent of Africa. Another one was the fact that in the Rwanda local studio, they were able to launch the Circular Economy Roadmap and Action Plan for the people of Rwanda. And in South Africa, they launched the Circular South Africa. So the Circular South Africa as an organization to facilitate knowledge sharing and to facilitate conversations. We have the Circular Economy Hotspots 2024 that was announced in South Africa, and South Africa happens to be the host. And then the new chapter that was formed in Zambia towards the WCEF in December. So these are interesting outcomes that were recorded in the WCEF to show that this event was really relevant. But then I would like to invite all of us here, if we are yet to read about or to read these documents, I would like to invite us, like the roadmap and the action plan in Rwanda, I would like to invite us to go back and read these documents. Reason being that these are conversations that we need to revisit to remind ourselves of what we should be doing when it comes to circular economy on the continent. So this is a gentle invitation to go and do that. Next slide, please. I'll be ending my presentation soon. So you'd see that even though this year we did not participate as a host or a co-host in the WCEF, it's equally played an impactful, there was an impactful role that ACEN played that eventually is rolling out to see many other benefits. So ACEN participated in the forum, of course, and also collaborated with other people to develop or to build other accelerator sessions such as the African Voices, the Africa Secular Journey, and ACEN also participated in useful conversations that would help in advancing the circular economy on the African continent. This were very useful so that you would realize that today's session is one of the impacts or the outcomes of those conversations, so that we are going to speak about material as a service and the impact it's going to have on the continent of Africa, the challenges and all other things that relates to it, how we can go on with it. So this is where I'll end my presentation. We can all see that ACEN's participation has been useful. We know that this is not the end, and there are other impact that will be recorded as we go on. So as we are going into the other aspects or the other part of the workshop, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Kira, who's going to facilitate the next session. So hi Kira, would you take over please? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debs, and yeah, I appreciate all that outlining of our work at WCEF. Apologies, I have a little bit of unstable network, so I'm just going to keep my video off for now. But yeah, we'll just start walking our way through what materials as a service is. I see from the registration list that a lot of people who were at our World Resource Forum panel about a month ago are also here, so hopefully it's not too much of a repeat. But materials as a service, or MaaS, is an innovative commercial model in which an entity maintains ownership of a metal or material instead of selling it. So this approach basically allows that entity to direct the utility and value of that material into its most valuable application. And this kind of allows us to direct the advancement of the circular economy in the most effective and utile way. In addition to this, the resource stewardship of metals across supply chains means we can pay attention to where that metal comes from and exactly how it moves through the economy over time. So not just in terms of understanding how to direct it better, but also understanding where all the touch points of that metal might be across the value and supply chain. This also allows us to be strategic and systematic with how we consider metals. They don't have to come from a mine, they can come from urban mines or from residual waste. We can also then consider where metals are most proximal to the value they create. This allows us to work to develop regional systems and hubs for processing metals and make them more decentralized than they are today. We can link this then to sovereign wealth funds and make sure that citizens and impacted communities are getting an equal share of the materials value, rather than controlling and holding that value in mining companies, governments, or in other forms of neo-feudalism. Thank you. This is the metals as a service diagram. As you can see, it basically attempts to map out the entire supply chain of the metals as a service model. It was developed in 2013 by Turntoo, by Sabine Uberhuber, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. But essentially the model is based on the idea that resource-rich countries and communities maintain the ownership of metals and minerals mined on their territory and sell that material as a service down the supply chain. This means that instead of selling the materials themselves, only the usufruct, or the right to use these materials and then gain a benefit from their use, is to be sold along the value chain. The sale of the usufruct would be combined with the contractual obligation to guarantee the recoverability of the materials at any point in time. Consequently, every player in the value chain would be obliged to design, produce, and sell their respective parts or final products in a circular manner. And the end result is every product, every building becoming a material depot or material library. This basically allows us to consider the value creation chain as a value sustaining chain and ensure the circulation of continuous flows. even more important here, I think, is the continuous financial flow, which you can see through these loops. I think it's kind of a little bit blurred out because the writing's in yellow. But the renting system basically ensures that the country of origin of the material itself can get continued dividends each time the material is reclaimed and reused. This basically implies that the resource-rich countries can start with the benefit of the value creation generated from their material, and then continue maintaining value from that even when those mines are closed. To facilitate the materials as a service system, a whole range of systems adaptations are necessary, starting from the documentation and tracking materials, the development of new contracts, legal and trade agreements, and different ways of developing a robust mechanism to communities so that they benefit from the financial flows. Next slide. Here you can see some of the outlines of the potential benefits of MaaS. Essentially, it allows us to consider the transparent and accountable mineral resource governance, addressing some of the resource curse issues that we see that are so prominent on the continent, incentivize stock management and circularity, so essentially reduce our reliance on the extractive industry, address choke points and price volatility of materials needed for energy transition. This is kind of done through how I described defining the ability of directing resources and materials through the value chain, and win-win partnerships through between Europe and Africa, because we have a fundamental understanding of what the reliance of the green economy is on the African extractive industry. There's a mutual benefit of implementing something that is more sustainable and is less harmful towards the communities and towards our earth. And the royalty payments can be used to fund socioeconomic development programs. All of these, as you can see, having registered today, are what we'll touch on in our breakout rooms, as well as some of the challenges that we've identified on the next slide. Sorry, Kristen. Yeah, thank you. So here we have a couple more framing questions that let us direct our thinking. So what are the governance mechanisms and traceability protocols necessary to ensure the responsible and sustainable use of resources through the MaaS arrangements? How will the rents generated by MaaS be managed in a transparent and accountable manner with the objective of maximizing the benefits to local communities and the host country? How can MaaS be facilitated by digital product passports? What government policies and incentives will be necessary to enable MaaS models? And what key material change should be addressed first to start MaaS models? Basically, what we want to think about here is addressing all of these challenges through their most low-hanging fruit options. So thinking about what metals have shortest supply chain, what exists in abundance, and what are required for a transition to an advanced circular economy and a green economy. Here we can start to understand how important the just transition lens of materials as a service can be. Basically, if we prioritize this thinking first, we can recognize what rights to resources are and resolve competing development interests through participatory processes, rectify existing inequities at the international level between countries, and mitigate emerging conflicts between countries through collaboration and support mechanisms. Basically, this just transition framework for the circular economy allows us to identify opportunities that reduce waste and stimulate product innovation, while at the same time contributing positively to sustainable human development. Next slide. This then kind of leads us into what the Materials as a Service Working Group does. So as mentioned by my colleague earlier, this is a consortium between the African Circular Economy Network, Turntoo, Het Groene Brein, and Chatham House. Together through those organizations, we are basically trying to consider developing this coalition of the willing, so including those organizations I just listed, but expanding that into academics, civil societies, representatives of local communities, which we mean here as people voicing the interests of communities around the mining sites, not elites or authorities, businesses, NGOs, financiers, and governments. This would then mean that we work towards a proof of concept to further refine the new economic system and facilitate and stimulate an academic and public discussion about the new economic system based on usufruct and local ownership. Next slide. What we need then to be able to do that is essentially a method of researching while doing, so building the bridge while we walk on it. Therefore, we're really looking for pioneering partners to really realize this proof of concept to investigate the potential of MaaS. This will require buy-in and coordination between the working group, governments, researchers, legal practitioners, finances, and mining communities, businesses, and producers, and basically really working together to finance different models of what MaaS might look like. We understand first and foremost that what this might look like in the African context is distinctly different from what our European funders might anticipate and want to address, especially considering what deindustrialization might look like on the African continent. Next slide, please. Sorry, once again, this is just an overview of who's involved in the different organizations. Next slide. And here we have kind of just some framing of assumptions and acknowledgements. So we are really, really aware that even though the eventual version of MaaS being implemented requires and requests for reduction in extractive industries, but we are also very aware that in the time being, mining and materials consumption will grow, if not at a rate that we haven't before seen, especially considering the requirements of electrification. So while the circular economy transition aims to decouple material consumption and economic growth, it's not possible. And the global economy still relies on extractive industries for that growth. Financial flows are of value. We acknowledge that we don't have a universal agreement on what value and wealth are, where Indigenous peoples might define wealth as their ability to continue to live within the environment without taking out of it. Western industrialism might consider wealth as financial value streams and economic growth. We support Indigenous definitions as an end goal. However, a realistic step towards restoration and recovery is metals on service. And the third point being, material scarcity will increase inequality. If we don't think about justice in our circular economy transition now, the transition might lead to a circular economy divide. We need new, just models to make the circular economy an enabler of justice. Next slide, please. Here we can see the breakout themes and the facilitators, which hopefully you have all been engaged with in your registration process. The first one is communities and basic income, facilitated by Zanele Malindi. This breakout will attempt to address some of the more social components of metals as a service, considering how the challenge of how we define impact, how we consider who might receive any dividends from the model, and the opportunity a system like MaaS may provide for basic income or a citizen permanent fund. Zanele is a public interest attorney at Richard Spoor, who focuses on environmental law and land rights. The second breakout room is governance and blockchain for governance, hosted by Nkululi Ntube from the African Union. The ultimate aim for this breakout room is to consider trust. So that means looking at how framing of the challenge in terms of trust allows us to consider the management of funds and capital flows that will occur as a result of MaaS, as well as how blockchain or other technologies might be leveraged to ensure suitable governance and reinforce trust in the systems that exist. Nkululi is the programs officer at the African Minerals Development Center, a specialized agency of the AU, tasked with the responsibility of coordinating and supporting the implementation of the African mining vision. Nkululi is also in charge of the artisanal and small-scale mining pillar of the AMV implementation framework and business plan. The third breakout room is traceability and metal passports or digital material passports, facilitated by Mufasiri Sibanda. The challenge here is where things become slightly more technical. When we consider value in supply chains, alloys, lifespan, and a couple other elements of MaaS, there really are some essentially fundamentally technical issues that we need to address that kind of stand in the way of how we might implement MaaS, both in the African context and globally. Here we consider what deindustrialization might look like, what the development of secondary industry might look like, and really try and get to the nitty-gritty of what MaaS might look like in the next few years. Mufasiri is the Stop the Bleeding Consortium coordinator. He has over a decade of experience in mineral resource governance in Africa. He's a researcher and blogger on socioeconomic justice issues. Fourth, we have the business case and financing breakout, facilitated by Jerry Ahadje. from the African Development Bank. While materials as a service has a compelling business case for mining and mineral companies from a stockpiling perspective, I think we can all reflect a bit on the De Beers model here. We need to understand what the just transition might look like and how to avoid neo-feudalism. This breakout room will consider the democratization of materials, secondary industry development, and building a business case that still meets the social requirements of how we envision MaaS, and what innovative financing approaches might help us address the above challenges. Jerry is a mining specialist with over 25 years of experience in natural resource management, research, policy analysis, and implementation, as well as mineral sector regulation. Jerry is the Chief Minerals Officer at the African Natural Resource Management and Investment Center, or the AFTB, where he is contributing his quota to the implementation of the African mining vision in several countries on the continent. Last but definitely not least, we have the Artisanal Mining and Formalisation Breakout, facilitated by Judy Hofmeyer from the Global Development Institute. Here we want to understand really a fundamentally African component of MaaS, given that there are an array of social challenges, but many of them are due to technological and social gaps. I think that perhaps one of the hardest to sway is the role of artisanal mining, the informal sector, and the need for inclusion in a just transition where data is unavailable. Judy is a PhD researcher and independent consultant focusing on the local community implications of natural resource governance regimes in Africa. Before resuming her studies, she spent 7 years working as a strategic advisor and mediator in mining regions across Southern Africa. I think that's all from my side for today, and hopefully that gives everyone a good starting off point to jump into their breakout themes. Hopefully my colleagues can help with facilitating that. Sorry, Judy, I'm just reading your question quickly.
There were some other questions as well from other people. If you scroll up a little bit, other people
Let
in
me
the
see
queue.
what I can jump to. Sorry, yours just popped up right first. Let me see what I can jump to very quickly before we head into the breakouts. Yes, as mentioned, the slides will also be shared, and there's also the breakout rooms will be navigated using a mirror board. On the mirror board, you'll also find the information that's contained in these slides. If Marie or Christy could perhaps share the mirror board so everyone can jump on that in the meantime. Yes, yeah, sorry, just reading through some of the questions here. There are obviously, given the time limit, absolutely can't be comprehensive in what we're looking at in terms of the meta service concept. There's a lot more meat to it here. If you are looking for further information, we'll also provide additional resources. But I think that I don't see any additional questions that specifically pertain to the content of the chat there, other than what I've just read from Leon, which is recycling service providers. That's definitely a component of what we need to address, and I think that comes into play specifically in terms of traceability as well as in governance. There's a lot of policy and implementation mechanisms that will need to be considered, and there's definitely a lot of different stakeholders. But I'll definitely make note that those first and foremost the initial step in terms of understanding what this might look like in the African context. In terms of how materials are collected and recovered, the aim here in the metals as a service model is also considering that there are a lot of adjustments that are going on in the both African and international regulatory landscape in terms of what material recovery is supposed to look like. Extended producer responsibility and other components of this do kind of start stepping us in the right direction of addressing some of the challenges of what material recovery needs to be and who's responsible across the value and supply chain. But that's definitely something worth raising in your breakout room. in terms of alternative export ban approaches, yeah, I think as we touched on, the decentralization approach of how we can monitor metals across the value and supply chain hopefully means that there would be a lot more capacity building on the continent in terms of what we can look at in terms of manufacturing and production of materials, as well as the development of a secondary industry. And this is really considering what the more development-oriented components of metals as a service can guide us towards. And then finally, Judy's questions. In terms of the practicalities of physical mechanisms of traceability of metals, I'm certainly not the expert here. Hopefully they can get into that in the traceability session, or one of my colleagues can very happily jump in and fill in some ideas. But in terms of the moving away from a dependence on extractive industry, I think that that's really defined well in terms of the consideration of above ground mines. So urban mines or material depots that we consider once there's essentially a carrying capacity of extracted metals and minerals that are already in existence that aren't underground, we can start changing how we value those materials themselves and consider these above ground mines essentially as places that we store the value and where they can retain value over time. And that's really where the business case and financing understanding comes. Hopefully we can reflect on this a little bit more broadly in the breakouts as well. If that's all, I think we can jump into the breakouts just so that there is sufficient time given, unless there's anything that that colleagues would like me to address first. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope that time was dynamic and fruitful for everyone. If I can maybe hand over now to the breakout room facilitators just to give us a quick summary over what you guys touched on. You don't need to be too lengthy, but maybe give us a couple highlights, and then we can maybe open the floor just after that. Zanele, would you mind starting first?
Sure. So I was in the room. Yeah, what we basically, I think the conclusion was we just have more questions than we do answers. But where we started was just essentially trying to decide, sorry, to give some context is, if MaaS is successful, what do we do with the revenue or dividends from the project? The first question is, what do we define who's impacted and therefore who benefits? Which, yeah, it's a possibility that there's ideas of maybe we do on a scale, or everyone gets to benefit from that. And I think what's most important is that communities are so often left out of or overstepped and overlooked in these processes. And that's probably where actually most, if not all of the answers are. They can say who is impacted, how they're impacted, what benefits they need, how they would benefit. And I think there's another question of, how do you define immunity? Sorry, I've just seen this comment that my sound is not great. Let me speak a little louder and put my volume higher. And hopefully you guys will be able to hear. I just said it opens another question of then how do we define what a community is? And then we also got into discussions about, as an idea for what to do with the revenues, is use it to fund the universal basic income grant, which is similar to the Alaska Provident Fund or the government pension fund of Norway, which uses the revenue from their resources to fund basic income grants. Again, there's the question of, is it a universal grant, or would it be needs-based in the same way, benefit and impact is scaled? So yeah, it was just discussion around that. We came up with no answers, a lot of questions, and yeah, that was the essence of our conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Zanele. I mean, I think, yeah, there was never an expectation that we would be able to figure this out in terms of answers in just 60 minutes, but I'm sure the questions are super helpful for framing. Could we get a summary of the governance breakout, please?
Right. The governance breakout session was quite interesting and very educative for all and sundry. We came in, of course, from the perspective of what governance means when it comes to minerals, and in particular minerals as a service. And in this case, what everyone knows as governance is rules, regulations, policy frameworks, who is engaged in what, beneficial ownership, and all that. And of course, our task, fortunately, being in a room where most of the participants actually understood the assignment, if I'm to put it that way. The idea was to look for a blockchain mechanism, or at least agree upon a potential blockchain mechanism that we can use. And as such, the debate was mostly focused on decentralized to centralized capacity or capabilities in terms of which blockchain mechanism to use. We eventually narrowed it down to decentralization, which is perfect in terms of what we want for traceability, for true transparency, for true non-capture of data sets, of data, and of course of information that is within the blockchain. So we picked a particular blockchain mechanism called XLP. Of course, as a group, we will actually have to read more on it. Unfortunately, one group member, will not be naming names, actually has had enough, or should I say, thorough research on the topic. And we all then circled into what is potentially the blockchain mechanism to use if we are to go through materials or minerals as a service and using blockchain as a governance mechanism. So it was a very fruitful session. And I think all the notes that I've put in could actually help. And it's a good thing that at least the session was recorded for the purposes of reportage. So that's how we stand. At least we now have a blockchain mechanism that we are potentially going to use. And of course, from a selfish perspective, the African Union through the AMDC was more or less picked as the broker of choice in ensuring that we make sure that this technology actually is deployed, whether at a regional or continental or even at country level. So yeah, that's it for now. I think that's all I can say.
Thank you so much. That sounds, yeah, like an incredibly engaged session. Looking forward to reading through your notes and maybe even watching the recording myself. We'll see. Could I get a rundown from the traceability group, please?
Thank you. We had a quite an engaging and interesting conversation, whether to go big or whether to appreciate that a journey of 1,000 miles begin with a single step. And starting with the last, we saw opportunities that there could be some disruptive, small emerging startups that are into circular economy, leveraging it for value, partnering with some of the producers in Africa to see how traceability can be able to offer that bandwidth or possibilities for increased benefits to host community, host nations. The other part of it, of course, to go big, trying to work with an established player. It could be Apple in the vehicle manufacturing sector. You're looking at possibly Tesla buying into the idea in trying to pull the strings in terms of making sure that there's traceability across the whole value chain. From the political economy analysis, we also discussed some of the barriers like corruption. People are comfortable where they are. So this disruptive idea, will it be welcome? But obviously, there's also that belief that things have to change and there's the future that lies before us. And the current system has shown that we cannot continue on the trajectory that we are, having faced with COVID, the conflicts that are growing, hunger, and the climate crisis. So it's something that also calls for a change to ensure that we rebalance Africa's development agenda through disruptive technologies. So trying to win hearts is quite vital. But obviously, in case I left some of the important details, colleagues that also had a better grasp of the conversation, you also have got the opportunity, Susan, to come in just to bolster the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, quickly butt in, but I think you said it beautifully. Now we kind of really tossed this idea around where in the value chain and how could we hinge this. And somehow the idea came up, perhaps we're barking up the wrong tree, because it, as much as we would desire to see in future an OEM like HP to say, our gold is 100% sustainably mined coming from South Africa. I don't see this yet happen, but perhaps the smart thing to do is to find out our counterparts in the global north. There must be lots of startups, guys that manufacture small scale solar panels, and then combine this with impact investment. And I literally only learned about it this morning. Thanks, Lara, for sending me the information, where the GIZ actually informed that there are those impact investment platforms where very nicely on franklin.de or something, I think I need to find it, where you can actually, as an investor, invest your money into this type of projects and you get a return of investment. And there are more and more people that would like to do this. So I think if we combine true pioneers on both sides of the hemisphere in the circular economy space, and we perhaps lubricate the whole thing with some impact investment from people that are passionate and have enough money, mostly sitting in the global north, we could perhaps even finance a pilot project, even if it's a bit kind of off the charts kind of way designed. But I think it would probably be much more promising to try to go the conventional route, to speak to an established mining company, to go to an African government, perhaps something quick and sleek could be really developed, where an uptake agreement could be reached, where they would say, okay, they need X amount of minerals of that platinum for their PV cells, and they are prepared to lease it. And that we could just then study the dynamics in a very kind of unobtrusive and small scale kind of setup. Yeah.
Thank you, Suzanne. I mean, that sounds, I'm glad you guys managed to get so deep into the weeds of it all. Really looking forward to reading a little bit more about what you guys have in mind. I mean, that kind of lends really well to actually the financing and business case side of things. Can you, Jerry, give us some insight into what you guys spoke about?
Yeah, so thank you very much. So first, for the financing group, we try to define, what the supply chain is. So from the ownership, up to recycling. So ownership, exploration, that is if we take a typical mineral, is it bauxite, iron ore, or lithium? So ownership, so from government, and then to junior explorers, then mining companies, then manufacturers, up until the material is now recycled. And so we said for this MaaS, there are 3 key features that we identified. So ownership along the value chain, where the benefits, needs to be structured along the value chain. And then resource stewardship also across the value chain will be very, very important. But one of the other key ones is deferred benefits across the value chain, but at greater value. So what do we mean by that? So if you need to get $100 today, because that is the model that is being practiced now, that miners, sell their produce and that is it. They don't get any royalties along the line. So whether you get $100 today or you get $1,000 at the end of 1 year or 2 years or more. Yeah, so this is where we are coming from. And so the questions really served as a guide But for financing some of our key items that we highlighted is a need for financial incentives. So like government, etc. needs to offer financial incentives to sectors that actively engage in materials, as a service. So this can be done through tax breaks, grants, subsidies, research funding, etc. So we learned some lessons from the Chinese model. How is it that China is, the global giant in terms of lithium-ion batteries and electric vehicles? So one lesson, they gave financial incentives, to their companies to be able, to produce. Number two, they provided offtake agreements. And then number three, they have homegrown industrial policies, among others. And so if we really want to build a business case, for financing, then these are some, of the things that we really need to do. Additionally, we need to be able to provide awareness and then capacity building, of various stakeholders, because they need to understand the concept in order to come on board. So in terms of opportunities as well, we talked about the financing aspect. How do we finance the MaaS? So I'm coming from a bank, and so this can easily be done through blended financing. And so what do we mean by that? So the state or government, which is the owner of the mineral resource, could use some funding to leverage a bigger funding from the private sector. So government, could come in for some funding to provide the necessary infrastructure that the private sector, needs in order to invest. So you could use maybe about $1 million to leverage about $10 million or $20 million, investment, into the country. And so this, are some of the things that we spoke about. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thanks, Jerry. It seems like you guys, really covered a lot of topics there. To wrap us up, Judy, could you give us a little bit of insight into your conversation?
Yes, sure. So we had 4 topics that we discussed in the ASM breakout group. First, we just looked at the characteristics of ASM, what makes it unique, what type of people participate in these activities, what are the characteristics of the sector. And then we spoke about the challenges unique to the sector of involving them in a MaaS initiative. Then we spoke about what would need to be true, what would we need to solve for to get the ASM sector involved, and then spoke about solutions. So I think just as a summary, the 2 greatest challenges of involving the ASM sector is the lack of legal recognition and legal protection that the sector enjoys mostly in Africa. And second of all, some resistance to formalization. So because some miners are maybe undocumented or maybe want to avoid paying tax, or maybe it's associated with criminality or money laundering activities, there is a resistance for it to be completely formalized, and therefore that might prove a barrier to participate in a MaaS initiative. And then second of all, of course, the technology may not completely exist to trace metals along the value chain to the extent that this solution requires. So in terms of looking at more feasible solutions, we said, what if we narrow the scope to legal forms of artisanal mining? So that would be urban mining or remining, which can enjoy legal protection, And second of all, looking at whether it's feasible for artisanal miners to mine almost in collaboration with industrial miners, so whether there can be demarcated parts of the licensed area that can be mined by artisanal miners, especially those deposits that are of lower grade or lower quality that the industrial miner does not have any interest in, but that through such an arrangement, artisanal miners can still participate in a MaaS kind of initiative with legal protection until our legal system changes to protect and recognize them.
Okay, incredible. I mean, some of that sounds even relevant outside of the context of MaaS. So, you know, looking forward to digging a bit deeper into that. Does anyone have any questions for anyone else while we have a few minutes before I give a couple closing remarks? I'll take that as a no for now. As mentioned in the chat, please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn and keep track of. I mean, metals as a service is just one component of what ACEN does. There's a lot of other areas, and the way that the network grows is through these kind of events and these kind of engagements. So we're looking forward to having you. Just to wrap up on some of what people said, I mean, I'm kind of blown away at how detailed some amount of time you had available. And yeah, just incredibly thankful for the level of attendance and engagement with the topic. I understand that it's obviously really hard work to conceptualize and work through something that is so kind of like in the ether. So I appreciate your willingness to engage. As mentioned earlier on, this is really driven forward by a coalition of the willing. So if there's other organizations, other representatives who are interested in being part of the working group and part of the way that we push the metals as a service concept forward and get it off the ground, please don't hesitate. We will be releasing a report on some of the findings from this workshop, and then really trying to utilize some of that information to address some of the lower hanging fruits of metals as a service and start getting it in motion. So please keep an eye out for that. We'll make sure to email it to everyone who registered and attended. And yeah, just wanted to say, yeah, thank you again to everyone who was able to come, and especially our facilitators for guiding the conversation so thoroughly. Yeah, really looking forward to what this might mean in the next months, years, decades type of horizon. So thank you again, and enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Kira, just a quick one. I think this was fantastic, and I really congratulations to put it all so beautiful together. I also feel very encouraged because we had about 2 weeks ago, we had another workshop, and that was with World Resources Forum as a side event. We had a lot of experts, you know, and it was like, that sounds like really, this is really, really hard to do. And I feel like, okay, drilling is a bad example if we talk about circularity, but I feel like we really kind of had a drill, and we drilled much, much deeper today. And what we have done is we put a summary together from the last one, what the speakers were saying, what their viewpoints were, but there's also a link to our pitch deck. So Kira, I'm just thinking, you know, because this contains a call to action. So I'll leave it up to Kira, but I would say that perhaps we should consider to distribute the pitch deck a little bit more, because that contains a lot of the contextual information, and also gives you an opportunity to say, yeah, you would like to be perhaps part of a bigger think tank, because I honestly think that we need to grow as a think tank. There's so much talent in this group, and there are so many aspects that I don't know the first thing about, including finances. And yeah, I would hate to lose that expertise that is clearly in this group.
Agreed. Thanks, Suzanne. I mean, yeah, it's a solid reminder. I'll make sure to circulate both the pitch deck and the report from the WRF panel to all the registrants, just because there is some really solid meat in there as well. And then hopefully in the next week or two, once I've had time to go through everyone's notes, do the same from the findings from this discussion, and really try and follow up on some of what was spoken about and proposed. So thank you for that reminder.